RetroDaze.
A common denominator amongst most retro hounds is the love of old video games. That's probably due to the first major home consoles, like Magmax Odyssey and Atari 2600, coming out in the 70s, followed closely by the video game resurgence fueled by the release of the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1985.
As the 80s ended, we shifted from Generation X to Millennial, ensuring that both generations would not only have fond memories of video games, but have a deep desire to reacquire lost games later in life. Unfortunately, if you didn't start collecting a decade ago, you may find the market a little rough on the old wallet. Don't fret though, fellow gamers, we are here to help with 5 Nintendo Entertainment System games that are both fun to play and affordable. Let's just hope you already own a console. Before we get to our recommendations, let's first cover a few of the inevitable debates that will likely emerge in the comments. Yes, there are other ways to play retro games in 2023, and most of these alternative options will be cheaper or even free. If you want to go the legal route, you can try tracking down one of the official mini consoles, though in most cases these are out of stock and subject to the whims of the secondary marketplace. If you already own a Switch, PS5, or Xbox, you can play a fair number of retro games via their respective subscription services, though the Switch will offer games most relevant to Gen Xers and Millennials. Of course, there's the gray area of emulation, which is more accessible than ever. Countless third-party handheld and mini consoles are sold online. Some come preloaded with games, though these can be rife with duplicate games, broken ROMs, and terrible hacks, while others leave the ROM hunting to the user. You can even load ROMs on a PC via emulators. DIYers often choose to build their own emulation machines with Raspberry Pis, mini computers, or full-on arcade cabinets. Or you could go with the old standby and jailbreak an older console. Look, the point is, there are plenty of ways to get your retro game fix without having to purchase the original hardware. But if you're watching this video, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that you have at least a fleeting interest in collecting retro games. After all, one thing you can't argue with is that the experience of loading a physical cart into the original console is unlike anything you'll find on an emulation machine. And for some of us, this is an all-important part of retro gaming. For all of our selections today, we're choosing games under $20, not including shipping. The only other requirement is that they're objectively fun games and worth our meager investment. Our first pick then is Life Force, coming in at an average of $14 for a loose cart according to PriceCharting.com. Life Force was an NES port of the arcade game Salamander, which itself was a spin-off of the Gradius series. Life Force is a scrolling shooter boasting both horizontal and vertical scrolling levels, with an advanced weapon system that allows for stacking upgrades. Apparently, the game also had a story, though unless you read the manual, you probably had no idea. Like so many other Konami games, this one features outstanding music, composed by Miki Higashino, incredibly vivid level design of alien landscapes, and brutal difficulty. Luckily, it also features the use of the fabled Konami code, which you could bet most kids required if they hope to get past the first couple of levels. The difficulty rarely scares players off though, because the gameplay, visuals, and music are all so addictive. Each level is a work of art, and the boss designs are still some of the best I've ever seen, with enemies like Golem, a giant brain with arms and one eye, and Giga, a terrifying giant alien skull. Next up is Batman the video game, released by Sunsoft in 1989 and loosely based on the movie. The game averages around the same $14 price point as Life Force and offers entertaining, if not difficult, gameplay. The side-scrolling action game could sometimes get a bit repetitive, especially if you sucked at it, but was also quite addicting, keeping you coming back for just one more round, time and time again. Highlights of this game again include audio-visual aspects. The atmosphere of the set design matched the aesthetic of the movie, and the included cutscenes between stages were incredible, though the Joker-featured scenes were the weakest. The music, too, retained the game's dark edge while managing to drive the action forward. Surprisingly, the ending to this game is so dark, any kid who beat it back in the 80s can likely remember the scene in vivid nightmares that have plagued them into adulthood. For an even cheaper option, coming in at an average sale price of a mere $8.50, we have Star Tropics. This is also our first adventure RPG pick of the day, standing in for its more pricey cousins. In fact, when this game was released, it was often compared unfavorably to The Legend of Zelda. Most players will immediately recognize the opening screens as looking a lot like Zelda. The save slots, name creation, heart meters, and top-down POV are all clearly inspired by Zelda, a game which Star Tropics designer Genyo Takeda admired. However, Takeda also wanted to create games specifically for the Western market, and so rather than using a fantasy setting, he set the story in a realistic, contemporary world navigated by 15-year-old baseball player named Mike Jones. Similarly, instead of trying to save a princess, young Mike is on the lookout for his lost Uncle Steve. I think I'm starting to see why younger kids may have preferred other games, especially when combined with some repetitive level design and music. Still, there was a lot to like, including unique gameplay, Mike's main weapon is a yo-yo, and the inclusion of a physical letter in the packaging that held a secret message you revealed by dipping the paper into water. While not a perfect game, for the price, this often overlooked RPG is one worth adding to your library. Pro Wrestling body slammed its way onto the NES in 1987 as the first of its genre on the system, and, many agree, retained its title as the best wrestling game on the NES even as other releases attempted to steal the belt. Coming in at a measly $7.21, this is the lowest average price on the list so far and a clear favorite among wrestling game fans. The programmer and designer, Masato Masuda, had a keen eye for detail, including elements like the cameraman, ringside commentators, and an uproarious audience. In the game, you get to choose between 6 fighters, each with an extensive moveset and unique finishers. The 6 wrestlers are all based on real-life counterparts to one degree or another, except for the Amazon, who quite clearly resembles the creature from the Black Lagoon for some reason. The single-player mode takes you through 2 distinct parts, the first of which requires you to beat each of the other 5 wrestlers before facing the final boss, either King Slender or Giant Panther, depending upon your wrestler selection. In the second part of the game, you must defend your title by beating each of the 5 wrestlers twice, and finally challenging the formidable Great Puma. Notably, as if that weren't enough, there's also a 2-player setting for added replay value. For our final pick of the day, we also dipped the lowest buy-in price at an average of $6.79. If you were to base your possible purchase on reviews of Magmax, you'd end up skipping the game completely, which is actually one of the reasons we decided to add it to the list. It's often overlooked since it rarely makes best of lists, and while we still wouldn't necessarily call the game a hidden gem, for the price, we think it's well worth your time. Magmax is best described as a horizontal shooter, but instead of a spaceship like Life Force, this time you're piloting a giant robot. Need I say more? Oh, I do? Okay then. You don't actually start out as a giant robot, rather as what looks like a hover car. The upgrades you find throughout the level, like the different weapons and shields you gather in Life Force, are the other parts of your robot, including his legs, head, and wave beam gun. An added bonus of building your robot is that when you're hit, instead of dying, you simply lose one of the parts, which you can rebuild as you continue to play. Level design is one area where this game falls short, especially if we continue to compare it to this list's other horizontal shooter. The levels are much less detailed than Life Force and in many cases bordering on abstract. The enemies are equally lacking in definition, and without the manual to tell you what they're supposed to be, you may not be able to figure it out. Gameplay is challenging if not repetitive at times, but still manages to offer a fun alternative to your regular rotation, especially at this low price. There were a number of other games that easily fit within our guidelines and come in under the $20 price point. When building this list, we attempted to steer clear of anything too obvious while also opting for lower-priced games overall. Still, we felt it necessary to at least acknowledge some of the other possibilities. Starting with perhaps the most obvious, we have all three of the original NES Super Mario Bros. Games, which can usually be found for under $20. It's fair to assume seasoned collectors would already own these, but if you're new to the hobby, these are must-buys. Since our main list lacked any puzzle games, we'll also recommend Dr. Mario for an average of $7.98, Yoshi's Cookie for $11, Adventures of Lolo for $11, and Solomon's Key for $12.50. And we can't forget the puzzle platformer A Boy and His Blob Trouble on Blobolonia, which averages around $13.50. Tetris is far too common an addition though, right? For racers, we again had a couple obvious choices like Rad Racer, which comes in at an average of $6, and RC Pro-Am for $8.
There are so many more hidden gems and commons alike that fall under our target price that one may even begin to wonder, is the secondary retro gaming market really that bad in 2023? Yeah, some of you are screaming in the affirmative because compared to the prices of these very same games a few years ago, they admittedly have gone up quite a bit. That doesn't mean there aren't some deals still to be had. In fact, over on my channel, Gen X Grown Up, I recently picked the top 10 games you could get for under $5 for the Atari 2600. We'll toss a link to that down in this video's description. So of course, that brings me to my favorite part of the video when I ask, what are some fun NES games under $20 that you would recommend? I would love to hear about it down in the comments, and if you enjoy our content, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and maybe even activating that ubiquitous notification bell. It really does make a huge difference. Let's meet again next week to celebrate yesteryear right here on RetroDaze.
Clicky clicky.